I want you to picture a box, a tall, rectangular, and usually a fairly expensive box.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe the architectural equivalent of a paradox.
Yeah.
In one part of the world, if you own one, it means you're a struggling millennial who got priced out of the detached housing market.
Right.
And this is the only way you can get a front door that's actually your own.
Yeah, that feels familiar.
But then, in another part of the world, specifically on a certain hill in Hong Kong, owning the exact same structure, almost down to the square footage, means you are, well, billionaire. We're looking at the townhouse.
It has to be the most, I don't know, schizophrenic building type in our entire data set. I was going through the history logs last night just preparing for this deep dive. And it is absolutely wild how this term has been hijacked over the centuries.
Hijacked is a strong word.
I think it's the right one. I mean, it started as this massive power move for the British aristocracy. We're talking literally a palace in the city. And somehow, over 300 years, it morphed into the default suburban compromise.
And that's exactly the mission today. We aren't just looking at floor plans and, real estate listings. We're going to try to unpack the sociology of density.
And the economics.
The economics, for sure. We've got legal journals here on air rights, which is a concept that's just fascinating in itself. We have historical records on the London social season, and we have some truly depressing real estate data that explains why a shared wall in New York costs more than a mansion in Ohio.
And we are definitely going to tear apart the legal fiction that allows you to own a house that is physically glued to your neighbor's house.
The freehold paradox.
Mm-hmm.
I flagged that in the notes. It feels like it shouldn't be legally possible, but here we are.
Here we are. And on top of that, we're going to look at the term itself, because if I asked you right now to define townhouse, really define it, you'd probably hesitate.
Oh, absolutely.
Is it a style? Is it a legal status? Is it just a marketing buzzword that real estate agents use?
I have literally had this argument with friends.
Uh-huh.
One says they bought a townhouse, but they pay condo fees. Another one says, no, I own the land. It's a freehold townhouse.
What?
And then you go to London or New York, and the word means something completely different than it does in, say, a suburb of Calgary or Phoenix. It's incredibly confusing.
It is. It's deceptively simple. Most people hear townhouse, and they have this vague image of a tall, skinny building.
Yeah, attached to another one.
Exactly. But when you actually start digging into the sources, as we have for this, you realize it is a term that is suffering from a massive identity crisis.
Okay, so let's set a baseline before we get too deep into the weeds. What is the sort of dictionary definition we're working with from the source material?
The broad definition provided by our sources is fairly straightforward on the surface. A townhouse or townhome is a type of terraced housing. In the modern context, it is often a unit with multiple floors sitting on a very small footprint.
And terrace just means they are stuck together in a row.
Typically, yes. But here is the aha moment that we are going to build toward throughout this whole discussion. The definition shifts radically depending on whether you are looking at it through a historical lens.
Or a legal one.
Or a legal one, absolutely. We are going to talk about the shocking difference between a condo and an apartment, because yes, there is a big difference. And later on, we are absolutely going to get into those eye-watering price tags in Asia I mentioned earlier.
I saw those numbers in the notes. I am still recovering. $37 million for a townhouse? That's not a house, that's a small country's GDP.
It's staggering.
But let's start at the beginning. Let's go way back to the word itself, townhouse. It seems obvious, it's a house in a town. But historically, it meant something much, much more specific, didn't it?
It absolutely did. If we go back to the British roots of the term, townhouse wasn't just a simple description of location, it was a description of status. We're talking about the 18th century, and even before then. If you use the word townhouse, you were referring specifically to the city residence of a noble or a very wealthy family.
The key phrase there being city residence, which implies they had another, probably bigger residence somewhere else.
Precisely. That is the critical distinction that's been lost over time. These families usually owned a main, much larger residence out in the country, a country house or an estate. The townhouse was effectively their secondary home. It was the pied-à-terre for the aristocracy.
That completely flips the modern narrative on its head. Today, so many of us think of a townhouse as a starter home or, a compromise because you can't quite afford a big detached house with a yard.
Right.
But originally owning a townhouse meant you were so incredibly wealthy that you needed a place to stay just for part of the year.
For the social season, yes, that's exactly right. The source material really highlights this concept of the social season. Now, when most people hear that, they might think of, Bridgerton or fancy dances, which isn't wrong.
Jane Austen novels come to mind.
Of course. But we need to look at the mechanics of it. Why did these incredibly wealthy landowners need a whole secondary house in London? Why not just stay in their massive castle?
Well, I assume a lot of it has to do with politics, right? Being close to power.
Power required proximity. You have to remember, Parliament sat during specific months of the year. If you were a peer of the realm, a lord, you had to be in London to vote, to lobby, to network, and most importantly, to be seen.
So it was performance?
It was absolutely a performance. But there was a secondary economic engine driving all of this, the marriage market.
Ah, so the townhouse was essentially a showroom.
Crucially, yes, it was a stage. You brought your marriageable daughters to town, and you needed a backdrop that screamed, "We are powerful and wealthy." And this specific purpose directly dictated the architecture of the building.
How so?
Well, if you look at the blueprints of a classic Georgian townhouse, the layout is very hierarchical. The ground floor, that's for business, waiting rooms, maybe the men's study, the entrance hall, it's public-facing.
Okay.
But the first floor, one flight up from the street, that was the piano nobile.
Which translates to the noble floor.
Exactly, the most important floor of the house. It had the highest ceilings, massive windows that let in all the light. This is where the drawing room was. This is where you hosted the balls. You were literally elevating your social status above the street noise and, frankly, the muck.
And the servants are where in this picture? Squeezed into the attic.
Attic and basement. It was a vertical class system right there in the building. The ground floor was business. The first floor was for show. The second floor for the family's private bedrooms. And then the higher you went up the stairs, the lower your status, until you hit the servants' small quarters right under the roof.
It's all about efficiency, but it's an efficiency driven by a really strict social stratification.
That's a perfect way to put it. So you see, it wasn't about efficiency in terms of land use, not originally. It was about access and status. The building itself was a status symbol. It wasn't an efficiency compromise. It was a luxury convenience for the absolute elite.
And even for the elite, they were still often attached to their neighbors.
Yes, and because land in the city, especially in areas of London like Mayfair or St. James's, was at a premium even back then, these houses were built vertically and attached. But we should not underestimate their scale.
I was reading about the Duke of Norfolk in the notes. This part blew my mind. So he has Arundel Castle in the country, which is, a literal castle.
Orange Park Castle, yeah.
But his townhouse in London, Norfolk House in St. James's Square, it wasn't exactly a shoebox apartment.
No, not at all. The source notes that Norfolk House was a terraced house, meaning it was attached to its neighbors, but it was over 100 feet wide.
100 feet. That is massive. That is wider than most large suburban lots today. And he's sharing a wall.
He is. And that's a crucial point about British architecture that often gets misunderstood. Most British townhouses, even the grandest ones, are terraced. We tend to associate terraced with smaller working-class housing, like the Coronation Street vibe.
Right, the little brick houses all in a row.
But in this context, even the super rich lived in attached homes in the city. There were exceptions, of course. A very small minority of the largest townhouses were detached. But the norm, even for a duke, was the terrace.
It's just so interesting to visualize that. You have these incredibly wealthy aristocrats, people who own thousands and thousands of acres in the country, and yet when they come to London, they are technically living in a rowhouse.
It really speaks to the density and the social fabric of the city at that time. But the interiors, that's where the townhouse legacy really begins. Despite the shared walls, these were incredibly grand residences with ballrooms, drawing rooms, multiple dining rooms, and of course, extensive quarters for a whole army of servants.
So the definition of townhouse here is just inextricably linked to the town being the capital city, the center of the empire.
That's it. It's a house for being in town.
Okay, so that's the aristocratic origin. The town in townhouse really meant London. Now, let's cross the ocean. Let's bring this whole concept to North America. The notes mention that in the U.S. and Canada, the term townhouse actually splits into two very, very different connotations.
Right. And the big dividing line, the historical marker, is the automobile. You have the old townhouse and you have the new townhouse.
Let's unpack the old townhouse first. This is the pre-automobile era. So I'm picturing places like New York, Boston, maybe Montreal or Philadelphia.
Exactly. New York City's famous brownstones are the classic example here. These buildings follow that original European model. They have a very small urban footprint, meaning they don't take up much land, but they are built vertically, sometimes 6 or even more floors.
6 floors of stairs. That is a daily workout right there. But let's talk about the word brownstone for a second. Is that just a poetic name, or is it an actual geological classification?
It's Triassic-Jurassic sandstone. It's
Yeah.
a real type of rock. And here is the great irony. It was originally considered a cheap substitute for better materials. Yeah, in the early 19th century, if you were really rich, you built with marble or limestone. Brownstone was soft, it was easy to quarry in the region, it was abundant. It was, and I'm not kidding, basically the vinyl siding of the 1850s.
And now people pay $10 million for it.
Scarcity completely flips the script, but the design logic in New York was a bit different from London. In London, you had the aristocracy. In New York, you had this rising merchant class. They needed density because Manhattan is an island. You physically cannot sprawl.
There's nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go. So the stoop culture was born.
The high staircase leading up to the front door. I see those in movies all the time. It's such an iconic New York image.
Right. But that stoop wasn't just aesthetic. It was deeply practical. It was sanitary. In the horse and carriage era, the streets were, well, let's just say they were biologically active.
Manure. You mean manure.
And mud and trash and whatever else. By raising the main living floor, the parlor floor, up a massive flight of stairs, you were lifting your living room out of the smell zone.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And the garden level underneath, which everyone fights for now because it has backyard access, that was originally the service entrance. That's where deliveries came in, where the kitchen often was.
That is fascinating. So the most desirable part of a modern brownstone was basically the delivery entrance.
Exactly. But historically, this whole design served a very specific purpose. Before cars, you needed to be within walking distance or later mass transit distance of the business and industrial areas. But if you were wealthy, you didn't want to live in a tenement. You wanted space. So the solution was to stack the space vertically.
And because they are in these incredibly dense cities like New York, Philadelphia, Montreal, and San Francisco, these old townhouses are incredibly scarce today.
And scarcity drives value. In these specific dense urban cores, the detached single-family home is almost non-existent or just astronomically expensive. So the historic townhouse becomes the premier residential asset. It is the closest thing to a house you can get in the city center.
Okay, so that's the romantic, historic, pre-car townhouse. Now let's talk about the one that most of us are probably more familiar with, the new townhouse, the post-automobile version.
This is a different beast entirely, a whole other species. Over time, the term townhouse in North America evolved. It came to describe these often non-uniform living units that are specifically designed to mimic a detached home, but usually in a suburban setting.
Mimic is a very interesting word choice there. It suggests they are trying to be something they aren't.
Well, in a way they are. They are trying to offer the feeling of a house, the private entrance, the multiple floors, maybe a tiny patch of grass, without the land cost of a truly detached home. And the sources make a very important distinction here. How do you tell a new townhouse from an apartment?
I feel like this is where people, including me, get tripped up constantly.
The door distinction is the easiest rule of thumb. A townhouse almost always has its own outside door. You walk off the street or the sidewalk or a path directly into your unit.
No shared hallway.
Exactly. An apartment, on the other hand, is typically accessed via an interior hallway or maybe an exterior balcony walkway that you share with other residents.
So if I have to walk through a lobby, wave at a concierge, and take an elevator to get to my front door, I'm in an apartment building.
Generally, yes, that's a very clear sign. And there is another layer to it, verticality. Townhouses are typically multi-floor units. You have your living room downstairs, bedrooms upstairs. Apartments are usually single-floor flats.
That makes a lot of sense. But then there's the ownership piece, which gets muddy. In the U.S., especially outside the big old cities, townhouse implies you own it. Apartment implies you rent it.
That is a very common linguistic shortcut in the U.S. It's a cultural convention. If you say, I live in a townhouse, people will assume you bought it. If you say, I live in an apartment, they assume you pay rent.
But that's not actually a legal rule.
Not at all. It's just a cultural habit. You can absolutely rent a townhouse. And as we'll get into, you can absolutely own an apartment.
Before we get to the legal stuff, which I know is where the real complexity lies, I want to clarify another term that pops up in the notes. The rowhouse. I have to admit, I always thought rowhouse and townhouse were basically synonyms. Are they not?
They are very close cousins, but they're not twins. The source material provides some really fascinating nuance here. A rowhouse consists of several adjacent uniform units. Think of those pictures of Baltimore or Philadelphia where you see block after block of identical brick facades.
Right, the continuous roof line. It looks like someone just used the copy-paste tool in real life.
That's a great way to describe it. Continuous roof, continuous foundation. Visually, it is a single long structure that has just been sliced into individual units. Historically, row houses were found in those older urban areas, Baltimore, Philly, New Orleans. But the distinction is often about perceived luxury and size.
Yeah.
The expert analysis in our sources suggests that a row house is generally considered to be smaller and less luxurious than what is traditionally called a townhouse. A townhouse implies a bit more architectural variation between units, maybe a bit more square footage, different setbacks. A row house implies utility and uniformity. It was often housing for the industrial workforce, whereas the townhouse might have been for the manager or the owner.
Is there a construction difference? Or is it just vibes?
Oh, there is a huge construction difference, and it gets right to the heart of the ownership question later. This brings us to the physics of the thing. We need to talk about the party wall.
The party wall. Which sounds fun, but I assume it probably isn't.
Not unless you really, really like hearing your neighbor's party, no. In a traditional 1920s row house, you often have a single wall dividing the units. You are literally sharing the bricks.
So my wall is their wall.
Exactly. A double brick thickness acts as a structural load bearer for the floor joists on both sides of the wall. Your floor beams are inserted into the same row of bricks as your neighbor's floor beams.
So, strictly speaking, the buildings are structurally codependent. If I decide to bulldoze my house, my neighbor's house might actually fall down.
It would certainly be very unstable. That's the interdependence of the classic row house. But modern building codes, well, they hate that.
I can imagine. Fire hazard, noise.
Huge fire separation issues. Terrible acoustic isolation. So in modern townhouses, you see a major shift toward what's called the double leaf wall.
2 separate walls with a gap in between.
Ideally, yes. It might only be a 1-inch air gap. It might be filled with fire-resistant insulation. But legally, and more importantly, physically, the structures are decoupled. That 1 inch of air is the difference between I can hear your TV and I can hear you thinking.
And that 1 inch of air must drive the cost up significantly. You're building 4 walls for 2 houses instead of 3 walls.
Precisely. And this leads to some very confusing terminology in the modern real estate market. We have to talk about stacked townhouses.
Oh boy. This is where you have a townhouse on top of another townhouse.
Yes. The sources describe these as homes with multiple units stacked vertically, typically 2. But here is the key that makes them townhouse-like. Normally, each one has its own private entrance from the street or the outside.
Okay, so the bottom unit walks in at ground level, and the top unit maybe has a staircase on the side of the building that goes up to their door on the 2nd floor.
Exactly. And this is where the terminology just goes completely into flux. If you have these stacked units side by side in a row of 3 or more, they're often called row houses. But if you just have a group of 2 left and right or up and down, the US and Canada have a dozen different names for them. Semi-detached, duplex, half-duplex.
Half-duplex. That definitely sounds like a Western Canadian slang term.
It is. In Western Canada, a half-duplex is just one side of a 2-unit building. But the point is, the townhouse category is broad enough to include these stacked configurations as long as they maintain that private street entrance and usually have multiple levels within the unit itself.
Okay, let's pivot to the topic that I think causes the most arguments at dinner parties. Condo versus freehold. This is the part that trips up every single first-time home buyer. You see a building that looks like a townhouse, you assume I own it, but the legal wrapper can be completely different.
This is such a crucial distinction, and we need to just debunk the myth right now. Condo refers to the type of ownership, not the type of dwelling.
Say that again, because I think that's the key.
Condo is a form of ownership, not a style of building. A townhouse can be a condo. A detached house can be a condo. A boat slip in a marina can be a condo.
So condo is just a legal wrapper you put around a piece of property.
Correct. The Canadian model, which applies broadly to how this works in many common law jurisdictions around the world, breaks it down very nicely. You have condominium, which is often called strata title in other places like Australia. In this model, you own the interior of your unit, the paint to paint, as they sometimes say, the airspace inside.
Right. From the drywall in?
from the drywall in. But you also own a specified share of the common elements. That means you co-own a tiny percentage of the roof, the exterior walls, the land underneath the parking lot, the swimming pool. You are effectively a shareholder in the physical structure of the entire complex.
Which is why you pay condo fees. You're paying to a collective pot to maintain all those things you own collectively with your neighbors.
Exactly. You have to look at the cadastral map. That's the legal survey of the land. In a condo or strata title, your legal property line is effectively a 3D cloud of air floating inside the building. You own the air volume inside the drywall itself, the studs behind it, the brick on the outside. That all belongs to the condominium corporation.
So if I want to punch a hole in my wall to run a new HDMI cable,
In a pure condo model, you are technically vandalizing corporate property. In practice, there are rules, but technically you need permission for major alterations. And this is why the fees are so important. In a condo, you're paying a monthly fee into a reserve fund because eventually that shared roof will need replacing, and the corporation has to have the money saved up to pay for it.
okay, so that's the condo model. Now contrast that with freehold.
Freehold is what most people think of when they think of owning a house. In a freehold setup, you own the land and the dwelling on it exclusively. You own the dirt, you own the roof, you own the bricks. The property line is a tight rectangle that goes around your house's perimeter on the ground, and legally it extends from the center of the earth up to the sky.
But wait, this is what I'm still struggling with. If I own a townhouse and it's physically attached to my neighbor's townhouse, how can I possibly be freehold? If my roof leaks, it might affect his roof. If my foundation cracks, it could pull his down with it.
And this is the freehold townhouse paradox. It seems impossible, but it exists. Remember that construction detail we talked about just a minute ago? The double wall with the airspace?
The famous inch of air.
That inch of air is legally significant. It's everything. In a modern freehold townhouse, the legal property line literally runs right through that gap. Technically, your building does not touch your neighbor's building. They just happen to sit incredibly close together, often on the same continuous foundation strip.
That is just wild. So it's basically an optical illusion of attachment.
In a legal sense, yes.
Yeah.
And that tiny gap is what allows you to own the property free and clear of a condo board or mandatory monthly maintenance fees. But it also means if your roof needs replacing, you are the one climbing the ladder or writing the check entirely on your own.
And what happens if the shared foundation cracks? That's the nightmare scenario.
That's where it gets messy. Usually there are easements or covenants registered on the title of the property that say something like, if the common foundation fails, both parties are obligated to cooperate and share the cost of the repair. But unlike a condo, there is no pot of money sitting there waiting. You have to knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, we need to come up with $10,000.
I can absolutely see why people get so confused. You can look at two rows of townhouses. They look completely identical, but one is a condo where the lawn is mowed for you, and the other is a freehold where you're out there pushing the mower yourself every Saturday.
And that ownership structure dictates not just the cost, but the entire lifestyle. Freehold townhouses often carry a price premium because people love the idea of owning the land and having no monthly fees. But condo townhouses offer that lock-and-leave convenience that a lot of people are looking for.
Speaking of premiums and costs,
Yeah.
we have to talk about what is happening on a global scale. Because if you think townhouses are just a suburban middle-class thing in North America, you clearly have not been to Hong Kong.
This was, without a doubt, the most shocking part of the research for me. In places like Asia, Australia, and South Africa, the term townhouse follows that modern North American sense of an attached or semi-detached home, but it manifests very differently. In places like South Africa and Australia, they are very often in complexes.
You mean like gated communities?
Exactly. Large, sprawling complexes with high security, resort-style facilities, pools, gyms, parks. In these regions, the strata title or condo model is absolutely dominant. The common property is owned by a corporation of owners. It's a very communal way of living, but often behind high fences.
But then you have Hong Kong. We have to talk about the property called 7-8.
The Hong Kong case study is just on another level. We have to remember the context. Hong Kong is a city completely dominated by high-rise apartment buildings. Land is arguably the scarcest and most valuable commodity there is. So the very idea of living on the ground, of having a front door that opens to the street, that is the ultimate unattainable luxury for almost everyone.
The sheer scarcity makes it exclusive.
Unbelievably so. Townhouses in private developments there are incredibly rare and are populated almost exclusively by the very wealthy.
The sources point to this specific property, 7-8. on Victoria Peak.
I have the number here. A 5,067 square foot townhouse, which, to be fair, is a big house anywhere.
That's a mansion, yeah.
But in 2008, it sold for 285 million Hong Kong dollars. That translates to 37 million US dollars. I did the math. That is the GDP of a small island nation. Why? Is it made of solid gold?
It's not the gold, it's the dirt and the air above the dirt. Hong Kong has some of the strictest land use policies in the world. The government owns almost all the land and leases it out for development. And because the population density is so extreme, the plot ratio, that's the amount of floor space you can build per square foot of land, is almost always maximized for massive towers.
Right, you have to build up to get your money's worth from the expensive land. You have to. So to build a townhouse, a low-rise structure on some of the most valuable land on the planet, is an act of pure economic defiance. You are wasting all that potential vertical space. You are paying for the absence of neighbors above you.
You're literally paying for the empty air.
That is the ultimate luxury in a city like Hong Kong. Silence, privacy, the ability to walk out your own front door onto the ground. In a city of over 7 million people living in the sky, having a ground floor is the ultimate status symbol. It's the modern equivalent of the Duke of Norfolk's London Palace.
$37 million. That breaks down to about 7,400 US dollars per square foot. For 1 square foot of floor. That was an Asian record at the time. You're paying more for a square foot of floor than most people pay for a used car.
And it's not just 7 or 8. The notes also mention a development called the Beverly Hills, a massive complex in the Tai Po district of Hong Kong. Some of those townhouse units are up to 11,000 square feet.
11,000 square feet. That's not a townhouse, that's a department store.
At that scale, the term townhouse is really stretching all the way back to its aristocratic roots. It's a palace in the city. But it just shows the incredible elasticity of the word. It can mean a 900 square foot starter home in Ohio, or an 11,000 square foot mansion overlooking Hong Kong.
And there's also a trend mentioned in the sources about suburban replacement. This is happening in major cities all over the world.
Yes, the infill development trend. You take an old house on a large block of land in a desirable suburb, maybe a rambling 1950s bungalow with a huge backyard, and you demolish it. In its place, you build a short row of townhouses.
I see this all the time in my neighborhood. They turn them sideways, right? The notes call it end on to the street.
Correct. They build them perpendicular to the street with a shared driveway. This dramatically increases density. You turn one single-family home into 4 or 5 separate units, but the end-on design gives them a degree of privacy, so they aren't all just staring out at the traffic. It's a way of densifying the suburbs without building towers.
Let's move inside the house for a bit. We talked about the verticality earlier, but I want to look at the architectural anatomy a bit more. I mean, the vertical lifestyle really changes how you live your day-to-day life.
It absolutely does. When your kitchen is on the 2nd floor and your bedroom is on the 3rd, you live your life in layers. It forces a certain level of fitness, honestly. But what's so interesting is how the names of the rooms themselves have evolved over time. The source material lists a whole bunch of rooms found in townhouses, and it's this amazing mix of the ancient and the hyper-modern.
Yeah, I saw servants' quarters on the list, which clearly harkens back to the old aristocratic days. But then right next to it, you have things like bonus rooms and great rooms.
The great room is a fascinating echo of the past. In medieval architecture, the Great Hall was the center of the house. It's where everyone ate, slept, and lived.
One giant room.
One giant room. Then we moved to the Victorian era with its separate parlors and drawing rooms and dining rooms. We compartmentalized our lives. Now, in the modern open-concept townhouse, we are tearing down all those walls and going right back to the great room, a single open space for living, dining, and cooking.
Time is a flat circle.
It really is. And look at the evolution of the kitchen. The source mentions historical rooms like the buttery or the scullery.
Buttery wasn't for butter, was it? I remember reading that.
No, that's a common misconception. It was originally from the Old French word for bottle bouteille. It was for storing butts of liquor or casks. And the scullery was where the dirty washing up happened. It was a wet, messy room you kept hidden away.
Right.
Today, we have the kitchenette in some smaller townhouses, a tiny, efficient cooking space. But in larger ones, the function has completely shifted. The kitchen is now the showpiece. It's gone from a hidden, grimy workspace for servants to the central display piece for the entire family.
And the drawing room or parlor has now become the family room or the den.
Or the man cave, as the source notes, or a bonus room. But the fundamental design constraint always remains the footprint. Because the townhouse is, by its nature, narrow, The biggest challenge for the architect is always light and flow. You usually only have windows on the front and the back.
That's a really good point. If you're in the middle of a long row, you have no side windows at all. It can feel like a tunnel if it's not designed well.
Which is precisely why you see architectural features like skylights, open riser staircases, and extra high ceilings mentioned in the anatomical breakdown. They are all design tricks to try and pull natural light into the dark center of that deep, narrow rectangle.
So we've gone from the Duke of Norfolk's 100-foot wide London palace to the narrow brownstones of New York, to the condo complexes of Australia, and finally to the multi-million-dollar bunkers of Hong Kong. It really is a massive journey for one building type.
It is. And I think it brings us right back to that initial question we started with. What on earth is a townhouse?
And it seems like the answer is, well, whatever the city and the economy needs it to be at that moment in time.
Exactly. The townhouse is an architectural chameleon. It adapts itself perfectly to the needs of the era. In the 18th century, the need was proximity to the royal court and a place to host balls. In the 19th century, the need was proximity to the factory or the counting house.
And in the 20th and 21st centuries.
The need is for a detached home feel in a crowded suburb where land has become too expensive for actual detached homes.
It's the ultimate compromise building. But compromise sounds so negative. Maybe adaptation is a better word.
Adaptation is much better. It allows for density without completely losing the human scale. You still have your own front door. You still have a roof that's yours. You aren't just a number in a 50-story elevator bank. It maintains a connection to the street.
But I have to ask.
Right.
As our cities get denser and denser and land values keep skyrocketing, is the freehold townhouse doomed? Is that model sustainable?
That is the perfect provocative thought to end on. As land values continue to rise, that legal fiction of the freehold townhouse, that little 1 inch of air, it becomes harder and harder to justify economically. The condo model, where you share the cost of the land and the structure among all the owners, is just so much more efficient from a development standpoint.
So we might be looking at a future where the physical townhouse building survives, but the idea of owning it, land and all, becomes a quaint relic of the past. Just like the scullery or the buttery.
It's very possible. The definition of townhouse might eventually divorce itself completely from the town and just become a synonym for suburban condo row.
Well, that definitely gives us something to think about. Next time you're walking down the street and you see one of these developments, look closely at that row of houses. Ask yourself, is that a row house? Is it a townhouse? Is it a condo? And most importantly, is there an inch of air between those bricks?
It's all in the details.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.